Hey there, come closer to the fire, because tonight we are going back to a moment when the whole human story could have ended in one small circle of frightened people. Today there are billions of us. We fill cities with windows and traffic. We cross oceans in aircraft. We send messages through invisible wires and sleep beneath roofs our ancestors could not have imagined. But if you pull the thread of time backward far enough, past farms, past painted caves, past the first long journeys out of Africa, the bright crowd of humanity narrows into something almost impossible to hold in the mind. A few thousand people, maybe fewer, maybe only about 2,000 breeding adults. The exact number is debated, but the shape of the fear is not. Somewhere in deep time, humanity passed through a narrow place, so narrow that one drought, one illness, one failed season, one unlucky winter could have closed the book before any of us arrived to read it. That is the image at the center of tonight. Not kings, not empires, not a city burning under siege, but a tiny living flame under a dark sky, held in the hands of people who did not know they were carrying the future. If these quiet journeys into deep history, old disasters, and the hidden scars inside us keep you listening, leave a like and subscribe. It helps keep this small fire burning for the next person who finds our past in the dark. Now, let the room settle. The fire is low. The night outside is still. We will move slowly, because this story is real, but not simple. Some numbers are debated. Some causes remain uncertain. Science is still listening to the bones, the caves, the ice, and the DNA. But the central truth remains steady. We nearly vanished. A bottleneck is such a clean word for such a frightening thing. It sounds like glass, like a shape in a laboratory. But in life, it means hunger. It means fewer children surviving. It means families disappearing without anyone left to speak their names. It means a group moving to a spring and finding mud. It means an elder dying before teaching the child which route is safe. It means a fire going out in the night and no nearby camp from which to beg for embers. The source begins by asking us to feel the number. 2,000. That is smaller than many schools. Smaller than the crowd at a local sports match. Smaller than the people passing through an airport terminal on an ordinary afternoon. You could fit the effective breeding population of humanity during the narrowest proposed moment into a few modern theaters and still have empty seats. It is almost absurd, until you remember that every person you have ever loved, every stranger in every crowd, every voice in every language, all of them depended on those seats not being empty in the wrong way. Every child born later, every song, every funeral, every city, all waiting inside a few thousand bodies that were cold, hungry, clever, afraid, and stubborn. Honestly, I have always found that more haunting than any ghost story. A ghost story says the dead may still be near. This story says the living almost were not. It says the world you know is not inevitable. It says humanity is not a mountain. It is a flame that once nearly went out. The first clue was not found in a cave wall or a stone tool. It was hidden inside us. Our DNA carries the mark. Modern humans are strangely similar at the genetic level. we look different on the surface. And those differences matter socially and historically because people have made them matter. Skin, the hair, eyes, faces, languages, habits, food, clothing, prayers. The surface variety is beautiful and real. But deeper down, in the long folded script inside our cells, humans are surprisingly close. The source gives the comparison that still unsettles geneticists and ordinary listeners alike. Two chimpanzees from opposite sides of Africa may be more genetically different from each other than two humans chosen from opposite sides of the planet. A person from Iceland and a person from New Zealand. A person from the Amazon and a person from the Mongolian steppe. Different lives. Different ancestors in recent history. Different weather on their skin. Yet, at the DNA level, we are all close relatives. That is not what one would expect from a species spread across the whole planet. It is the signature of a narrowing. Imagine a bag of colored stones. At first there are many colors: deep blue, red, gold, white, green, gray, black, all mixed together. Then a disaster comes. A hand reaches in and pulls out only a tiny handful. Most colors are lost, not because they were weak, not because they deserve to vanish, but because chance is a cold judge. The handful survives. Later, the stones multiply again, filling the world, but they can only multiply from the colors that made it through. That is what a bottleneck does. It does not only reduce numbers, it reduces possibility. And after the crisis, when humanity grows again, it grows from what remained. But mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes are only narrow threads. To understand the larger pattern, scientists began reading the whole genome, not one maternal road or one paternal road, but the entire landscape of inheritance. With better sequencing and more powerful models, they found signs that human ancestors had spent a long time in small populations, and perhaps passed through one or more severe crashes. The signatures were subtle, but persist. Patterns of genetic variants stayed linked together longer than expected, as if the normal shuffling of genes had been interrupted by a small surviving group. Slightly harmful mutations remained in patterns that suggest genetic drift. Chance had become stronger than selection for a time. In a large population, natural selection has more room to remove harmful variants. In a tiny population, bad luck can walk through the door and sit at the table. By the time geneticists built models from these many clues, estimates varied. Some suggested a few thousand breeding individuals. Some suggested fewer. Some argued for a broader window. Perhaps an effective population between 1,000 and 10,000. Some questioned whether the pattern reflected one sharp crash or a longer era of small, separated groups. That debate matters. We should not flatten it into certainty just because a single dramatic number sounds better in a title. Still, the fear remains. Humanity was small. Too small for comfort. Small enough that the future could have failed quietly. Think of a night in one of those ancient camps. No one there knows the word genetics. No one knows the word species in our modern sense. No one knows that their descendants might someday fill continents, build libraries, argue with machines, and fall asleep listening to stories about them. They know only the immediate world. The fire must live. The child must eat. The old woman must remember where the water is. The young hunter must return. The shellfish must be gathered before the tide covers the rocks. The sick person must survive until morning. There is no grand music, no banner, no promise from history that they will make it. Only breath, smoke, hunger, memory, and the will to try again when the sun rises. The source calls the bottleneck a near-death experience written in our genes. That phrase is accurate in feeling, even when the exact numbers remain debated. We are not reading mythology here. We are reading patterns inside living bodies. The evidence is molecular, statistical, and incomplete, but it points toward the same shadow. Our ancestors passed through an age when the human line grew frighteningly thin. And then comes the question that gives the story its dark pull. What caused it? What kind of world presses humanity down to a few thousand survivors? What kind of crisis removes so much genetic diversity that 8 billion people later still carry the scar? Was it one great catastrophe? A volcano that darkened the sky? A volcanic winter that chilled the planet? Or was it slower? Disease moving through small bands? Competition with other human groups? Climate changes that came not as one blow, but as a long hand at the throat? The source begins with the most dramatic suspect. Toba, a volcano in what is now Indonesia. Around 74,000 years ago, it erupted with a force beyond ordinary human experience. It threw ash across continents. It may have cooled the world. It may have turned already difficult habitats into death zones. Some scientists have argued that this eruption nearly finished the job that climate stress had begun. Others disagree. They point to sites where people survived through the ash layer, to climate models that suggest the cooling may not have been as global or as long as once feared, to the possibility that the bottleneck began earlier or lasted longer. They remind us that science is not a single clean drumbeat. It is many careful footsteps in dust, often walking back to correct the path. We will follow that debate, but not yet. For now, stay with the small fire. Stay with the number. A few thousand, maybe more in total living humans, because effective breeding population is smaller than total population. Maybe 5,000, maybe 10,000, perhaps more depending on the model. Still too few. Still small enough that a modern stadium could hold them. Still small enough to make the present feel miraculous. Outside the camp, the world is not friendly. The climate is unstable. Food is not guaranteed. Predators watch. Disease waits in water. Blood. Insects. Wounds. Other groups may be allies or threats. The night is large, and the human circle is small. A child turns in sleep. An elder adds a careful stick to the fire. Sparks lift into the dark. Those sparks are us, though they do not know it. The entire future of humanity is not a shining road yet. It is only a possibility, thin as ember light, held against wind by people whose names are gone. The smallness is the part we keep returning to. A species can look inevitable from the far side of success. From here, with our cities and maps and bright screens, it is easy to imagine that humans were always going to arrive. But deep time does not promise arrival. It offers chances. It removes them. It lets some fires burn and lets others go black in the wind. Those ancient people did not stand at the beginning of a guaranteed empire. They stood at the edge of being forgotten by the earth itself. That is why the number matters so much. And somewhere, far away, beneath a lake and a mountain of pressure, the earth is preparing to remind them that survival is never promised. Before we listen to the volcano, we need to listen more closely to the body. Not the body as it looks in a mirror, not the skin, the hands, the eyes, the small marks that make one person familiar and another person a stranger. I mean the body as a hidden archive. Every cell carrying an old script, folded and packed away in darkness, copied with every generation, damaged a little, repaired a little, passed forward by people who never knew they were writing history. A scientist in a quiet lab does not hold a spear or dig a root from dry soil. The work is gentler to look at. A tube of blood, a sample of saliva, a screen full of letters, a machine humming softly under white light. Yet the question is the same question an ancient group might have asked beside a dying fire. Who made it through? Who disappeared? The strange thing about human DNA is not that we are different. We are different in countless visible ways. The strange thing is that beneath those differences, we are so close. Too close, in a way that made scientists pause. When researchers compared humans across continents, they found a species spread everywhere, but carrying less deep variation than expected. The chimpanzee comparison makes the feeling sharper. Two chimpanzees separated by thousands of miles in Africa can be more genetically different from each other than two humans chosen from any two places on Earth. That is not because humans are simple. It is because at some point, our ancestral population was squeezed until only a small part of its older diversity remained. Imagine again the colored stones. 1,000 colors in a bag. Then one small handful pulled out during a storm. Later, the handful is copied again and again until it fills many rooms. There are new combinations. There is beauty. But the colors that were not in the handful cannot return unless new changes appear slowly over time. That is the bottleneck. The first great line of evidence came through mothers. Mitochondrial DNA passes from mother to child. Sons carry it, but do not pass it onward in the same way. Daughters do. Because mutations appear at rough rates across time, scientists can compare mitochondrial DNA from many people and trace living maternal lineages backward. When they did this, all living maternal lines converged on a woman in Africa who lived long ago, often called mitochondrial Eve. The name is memorable and a little dangerous. It can make her sound like the only woman alive, standing alone under a prehistoric tree, which is not what the evidence says. Many women lived then. Many had children, but the direct maternal lines of those other women eventually ended. Somewhere, a woman had only sons. Somewhere, daughters died young. Somewhere, a lineage survived for 10,000 years and then vanished in a bad season. Mitochondrial Eve is the woman whose maternal line happens to reach every living person today. That is not magic. It is survival through a narrowing maze. Then the paternal line gave its own answer. The Y chromosome passes from father to son. When scientists traced it backward, living paternal lines converge toward a man sometimes called Y chromosomal Adam. Again, the name is easy to misunderstand. He was not the first man. He was not the only man. He was the man whose direct paternal line survived while others faded. These maternal and paternal studies were only two threads, and scientists knew they were not enough. A single line can mislead if treated as the whole cloth. So researchers turned to the whole genome. The entire inheritance passed through tangled generations of mothers and fathers, recombined again and again through time. There, the scar became wider. One clue is linkage disequilibrium, a term that sounds as if it should be whispered only in a lecture hall with uncomfortable chairs. The idea is not impossible. In large populations, genetic pieces are shuffled over many generations. Patterns break apart. Variants mix and spread. But in small populations, when only a few people pass genes forward, certain pieces remain linked together for much longer. The deck is not shuffled as freely because there are fewer hands at the table. Human genomes carry such patterns. They look like old knots in the thread. Another clue is mutation load. Every person carries slightly harmful mutations. Most are small, quiet, not dramatic enough to be noticed in daily life. In large populations, natural selection can remove some of these over time. In small populations, chance becomes stronger. A harmful variant can survive simply because the people carrying it survive, and there are not enough others to dilute the accident. This is genetic drift. A small boat on a dark sea, not always steering by fitness, sometimes pushed by wave, storm, and luck. By the early 21st century, models grew more sophisticated. They did not all agree on a single number, because deep time does not hand out clean receipts. Some estimates suggested an effective breeding population of only a few thousand during a severe narrow phase. Some proposed numbers around 2,000. Some went lower. Others argued for larger totals, or for a long period of small populations rather than one sudden crash. Effective breeding population is a careful phrase. It does not mean every human alive. It means the number of individuals actually contributing genes to later generations. A camp may hold children, elders, sick people, injured people, people who never reproduce, people whose children do not survive. The living population can be larger than the effective breeding population. So if the effective number was around 2,000, the total number of humans may have been several thousand more. Still, that is terrifyingly small. There are more people in a busy market on a warm evening than there may have been breeding humans on the whole planet in that narrowest window. A sports stadium could hold the species with seats left over. A few scattered valleys, a few coasts, a few refuges, perhaps holding everything human life would ever become. The debate continues. Some geneticists argue that the signal may come from population structure. Perhaps humans were not one tiny group, but many small separated groups that rarely interbred. From the genetic record, that can sometimes look like a bottleneck. Others think the decline lasted far longer than a single disaster. A long, grinding crisis over tens of thousands of years. Some focus on a later bottleneck around the time of Toba. Others point to older bottlenecks deeper in the human lineage. Science here is not a clean door opening. It is a cave with many passages. But the common shape is still severe. Human diversity is low. Ancient populations were small. Many lineages died. Our present abundance grew from a narrow ancestral base. The source calls the evidence forensic. That is a good word. Forensic means the event is gone, but traces remain. A mark on glass, a strand of hair, a pattern in blood. Here, the crime scene is deep time, and the victim almost was humanity itself. The question becomes motive, or rather cause. What pressed the species so hard? And then there is Toba. But Toba is not simple either. The eruption was real, massive, and among the largest in the last 2 million years. Around 74,000 years ago, beneath what is now Lake Toba in Sumatra, a huge volcanic system released an unimaginable volume of ash, rock, and gas. Some estimates speak of around 2,800 cubic kilometers of material. That number is hard to feel. So think of landscapes buried, forests erased, rivers choked, skies turned gray far from the blast. In South Asia, ash layers testify to the reach of the eruption. People living far from Sumatra would not have known why the sky darkened. They would only know that ash fell into eyes, food, water, hair, and breath. Leaves turned gray. Animals struggled. Rivers carried grit. The familiar world became strange in a way no story could explain. Then the aerosols rose high enough to matter to the whole planet. Sulfur dioxide and fine particles can reflect sunlight. If enough enters the stratosphere, the world cools. This is volcanic winter. The name sounds almost elegant, but the life under it is not. Growing seasons shorten. Rain patterns shift. Plants weaken. Animals starve. Human groups already close to the edge find the edge moving under their feet. But newer evidence complicates it. At Jwalapuram in southern India, stone tools appear below, within, and above the Toba ash layer, suggesting some people continued their lives through the eruption. At Pinnacle Point in South Africa, coastal occupation, shellfish use, pigmo, and tool-making continue through the period. Improved climate models suggest cooling may have been more regional and shorter than the most extreme scenarios. Africa may have been stressed, perhaps badly, but not necessarily made into a lifeless refuge of despair. So where does that leave us? With uncertainty. Toba may have caused the bottleneck. Toba may have worsened an already severe crisis. Toba may have been one hammer blow among many. Or the bottleneck may reflect older, longer, more complicated pressures. The source does not end the debate. and neither should we. What matters for the story is that the ancestors survived a world that had become hostile enough to leave scars in us. Whether the sky darkened from Toba alone, from repeated climate shocks, from disease, from competition, or from all of them braided together, the result was the same. Humanity became small, and the small group that remained had to learn the art of lasting. The fire in our room lowers. Imagine now the lab light fading into cave light. The genome screen becomes embers. The letters in DNA become footprints in ash. Outside the cave, the world is cold, dry, uncertain. Inside, someone tends the fire with a care that looks almost sacred. Someone watches an elder dig a root. Someone listens to the tide. The evidence has brought us to the edge of daily life. Not the abstract survival of a species, the ordinary survival of bodies. Hands cracking shellfish, smoke in eyes, children crying from hunger, old people carrying knowledge more valuable than any treasure, small bands moving between caves, springs, coastlines, and river valleys, trying to make tomorrow possible. The laboratory tells us the shape of the loss, but it does not give the loss a face. For that, we have to let the numbers become people again. A genetic estimate becomes a child sleeping close to the fire. A model of population size becomes an elder counting the dry days since rain. A curve on a screen becomes a group deciding whether to stay near the spring or risk the long walk toward the coast. The science is strongest when we remember that every data point was once a body trying to live. The bottleneck was real in the genes. Now we must feel it in the day. The day before the sky changed, the forest did not know it was standing above a wound. On the island we now call Sumatra, the air was heavy and warm. Leaves held moisture. Insects moved in the green shade. Birds called and answered over the trees. Somewhere near the great volcanic basin that would one day become Lake Toba, the earth looked alive in an ordinary way, patient, layered, covered in roots and shadow. Nothing in the surface world needed to announce what was building below. Deep underneath, pressure had been gathering for a very long time. Rock held heat. Magma pressed upward. Gas waited inside stone. The mountain system breathed in its own slow language, a language no human ear could translate. There may have been tremors. There may have been hot springs, strange smells, animal restlessness, small warnings scattered through the land like crumbs. But even if people saw such signs, they could not know the size of what was coming. No one had words for a super eruption. No one could imagine ash crossing seas and settling over distant stone tools. No one could imagine a dimmer sun. Then the earth opened. The eruption of Toba, around 74,000 years ago, was one of the largest volcanic events of the last 2 million years. The source describes around 2,800 cubic kilometers of material thrown into the atmosphere and across the land. Numbers like that are too large to feel, so let them become images instead. A forest vanishing under hot ash. A sky turning from blue to iron. A sound so vast that it is no longer heard as sound, but felt through bone and ground. Near the eruption, life would have ended quickly. Pyroclastic flows, burning clouds of ash, gas, and rock, moved faster than any living creature could flee. Valleys filled. Trees were stripped, buried, or burned. Rivers changed color and weight. The world near the volcano became a place where the air itself was no longer safe to breathe. Farther away, the disaster arrived more quietly. Ash began to fall. Imagine a camp in India, far from Sumatra, where the people do not know the name of the volcano, do not know the island, do not know that a mountain has broken open across the sea. Morning comes strangely dim. The air tastes bitter. A gray powder gathers on leaves, on hair, on stone, on the skin of sleeping children. Someone wipes it from a tool and it returns. Someone covers a water vessel and finds the rim already dusted again. At first, perhaps, they wait. The world has always had strange days. Storms come. Fires happen. Dust blows. The old people know many things. They may say, stay close, cover the food, keep the fire alive, watch the animals. But the ash continues. It settles on fruit. It settles on tubers. It settles on water. It enters breath. A person drinking from a pool tastes grit. A child coughs. Footprints become pale in the dust. The sun remains hidden behind a veil no one can touch. The birds grow quieter. Leaves lose their shine. The familiar forest becomes a gray version of itself, as if the world has been rubbed with bone powder. The source presents Toba as the great suspect in the human bottleneck. The argument is powerful because the eruption was real and enormous. Ash layers across South Asia show its reach. The timing, around 74,000 years ago, falls close to some proposed windows of severe human population stress. If an already small and scattered human species faced such a climate shock, Toba could have been the final blow that drove numbers down. The mechanism is not hard to understand. A volcano throws sulfur dioxide and fine particles high into the atmosphere. These aerosols reflect sunlight. Less sunlight reaches the surface. Temperatures fall. Rainfall patterns shift. Monsoons weaken or become unreliable. Growing seasons shrink. Plants fail. Animals that eat plants decline. Predators follow the hunger. Human beings, standing near the end of many food chains and depending on knowledge of place, find that place changing faster than memory can help. This is volcanic winter. The phrase sounds neat. The living experience would not be neat. A family wakes cold when cold should not be there. A group follows tracks and finds fewer animals. A river still runs, but the plants near it have withered. A root that used to feed them is smaller. A fruiting tree gives little. A dry season lasts longer than the elders expected. Ash makes the ground unfamiliar under the feet. There is no announcement that says the climate has changed. There is only failure. One expected food after another becomes uncertain. The source asks us to imagine human groups already under stress. Perhaps they were scattered across Africa and parts of Asia in small bands. Perhaps they had survived earlier dry phases, disease, competition, and local collapses. Then Toba enters the story like a gray hand lowering over the world. In the harshest version of the hypothesis, the eruption caused a global volcanic winter lasting years. Populations already thin became thinner. Many groups disappeared. The survivors may have clustered in refuges, especially coastal zones where shellfish, fish, seaweed, and intertidal foods offered more reliable calories than inland game or plants. The coast becomes a quiet hero, not dramatic, not fast, just patient. Tide comes in, tide goes out. Even when inland plants fail, the rocks may hold limpets. Mussels may cling in dark bands. Snails may be pried from pools. Seaweed may be gathered. Fish may be trapped in shallow water. Octopus may hide under stone. Shellfish are not glamorous, but during a bottleneck glamour is a luxury, and a clam is a very serious piece of hope. Imagine a small band reaching the shore after days of poor foraging inland. The wind smells of salt. The rocks are slick. The tide is low. Fingers search cracks. Shells cut skin. Children learn where to step. An elder shows which pool is safe, which shell is worth the effort, which sharp edge must be avoided. A fire smokes near the cave mouth. Shells open in heat with tiny sounds. The meal is small, but it is food. If the Toba winter truly pressed the world hard, these coastal refuges could have mattered deeply. They did not need to be paradise. They needed only to be slightly more predictable than the failing interior. Survival often belongs to the less bad option. The ash would not fall everywhere in the same way. The cooling would not strike every region equally. Some groups would suffer terribly. Others might endure with hardship. Some inland populations may have vanished while coastal ones persisted. Some tool traditions may have continued, not because the disaster was small, but because humans were adaptable in uneven landscapes. Still, in the first telling, Toba is a beautiful suspect because it gives the bottleneck a face. A volcano. A sky turned gray. A dim sun. A winter that did not belong to the season. A generation raised under weakened light. The human imagination likes single causes. One eruption. One disaster. One night when everything changed. It makes the horror easier to narrate and perhaps easier to bear. If one monster nearly killed us, then we can point to the monster and say, "There, that was the throat of the hourglass." But nature rarely works so cleanly. Even so, stay in the Toba world for a while longer. The sun is a pale disk. The air is colder than it should be. The trees hold ash in their leaves until rain turns it into streaks. Water tastes wrong. Animals move differently. People cough more often. The old roots no longer offer what they once offered. A camp that worked for grandparents may fail the grandchildren. The social pressure grows. When food is scarce, kindness becomes more difficult, not because people become evil, but because hunger tightens every thought. Who eats first? Who carries the child? Which elder still has ostalage worth the calories required to feed them? Which injured person can be moved? Which stranger camp is ally and which is danger? These questions are not abstract. They sit beside the fire. A bottleneck is made of such questions. Not only dead forests and volcanic ash, also decisions. A group must decide whether to stay near water or risk the ridge, whether to share the last roasted shellfish with a weak child or a strong gatherer, whether to seek another group for mates and knowledge or avoid them for fear of conflict and disease, whether to keep moving while the sky stays dim or remain in the cave where the embers still live. Every decision is small. Together they determine whether a lineage reaches us. The source does not claim that Toba alone must explain everything. It presents Toba first because the scale fits the fear. And what a scale it is. Compared with familiar eruptions in recent history, Toba was vastly larger. Mount St. Helens in 1980 released about 1 cubic kilometer of material. Krakatoa in 1883 released far more and changed sunsets around the world. Toba released thousands of cubic kilometers. The comparison is not a little louder thunder. It is a different category of event. But the people living through its distant effects would not measure cubic kilometers. They would measure the day by food, by coughing, by whether the baby wakes, by whether the old path is still useful, by whether the fire catches in damp ash. A child in that world may have thought gray skies were normal. If the cooling lasted long enough, a generation might grow up without remembering the former abundance. The elders would speak of animals once more common, roots once larger, rains once more faithful. The young would listen the way young people often listen to old stories, half believing, half wondering whether the past always sounds larger because the old carry it. But the genetic scar suggests that somewhere, whatever the exact cause, enough lines ended that our species changed forever. The gray image of Toba remains powerful because it gives the scar weather. Ash on leaves, cold under skin, a sky that looks tired, a shore where a small group gathers shellfish as if each shell is a vote for the future. At night, the survivors sit by the cave fire. The flames are not bright. Fuel is scarce. Smoke curls along the roof. A woman cleans grit from a child's hair. A man repairs a point with hands that tremble from hunger. An elder speaks quietly, perhaps telling where to find tubers when the first place fails, perhaps recalling the stars before the haze, perhaps simply keeping fear from becoming silence. Outside, the ash world waits. No one says humanity. No one says extinction. They say water. They say fire. They say tomorrow. And beneath those small words, the whole species leans forward, hoping the sun will strengthen again. The Toba theory gives us the great volcanic night. But when scientists brushed ash from tools, when they studied caves and climates and survival patterns, the story began to resist the simple shape. The volcano was real. The danger was real. Yet the human record did not vanish everywhere under the gray layer. The ash settles. The question remains. And now the path turns toward the evidence that makes this ancient disaster more complicated than a single darkened sky. The ash settles. But the question remains. If Toba nearly ended humanity, then the ground should remember the silence. Archaeologists expected, in the strongest version of the catastrophe theory, to find empty layers, broken traditions, abandoned places, a before and an after so clear that even dust would point to the wound. A world covered in ash should show a human record suddenly interrupted. At first, that seemed possible. Then the tools began to speak more carefully. In southern India, at a place called Jwalapuram, researchers found stone tools below the Toba ash layer, within the time around the ash, and above it. That does not mean life was easy there. It does not mean people shrugged at the sky and carried on as if nothing had happened. It means the stone tool tradition did not simply vanish. Human presence or human technology continued through the gray band. Imagine an archaeologist kneeling in the heat. A trench wall rises in layers. Soil, sediment, ash, soil again. The ash is pale, a horizontal memory of a volcano far away. The brush moves slowly. A stone flake appears below the ash, then another above it. The tool is small, almost plain to an untrained eye, a piece of shaped stone with an edge made by intention. But in that edge is a challenge to a dramatic story. Someone was there before. Someone was there after. The world changed, but the line did not break in that place. Other evidence in India has also suggested continuity of certain tool traditions across the eruption. The exact identity of the tool makers and the relationship to later populations can be debated. And it is debated. But the simple apocalypse model begins to weaken. If Toba caused a total human collapse across South Asia, the archaeology should be emptier. It is not empty. Then we move to Africa. Pinnacle Point in South Africa becomes one of the key places in the source. A coastal site, caves looking toward the sea, layers that preserve hearths, shellfish remains, pigment, and evidence of sophisticated behavior. Around the time of Toba and through difficult climate periods, people at such coastal sites seem to continue living, gathering marine foods, using pigments such as ochre, and making tools. The cave does not show a species simply crushed into darkness. It shows adaptation. Picture Pinnacle Point in the evening. The cliff holds the day's warmth for a little while after sunset. The sea moves below, restless but dependable in its rhythm. Inside the cave, smoke stains the roof. Shells crack in fire. A stone point lies near a hearth. A lump of red ochre rests where someone used it, perhaps to mark skin, hide, object, or meaning. The wind brings salt. The people are not comfortable. Comfort is not the claim, but they are present. Presence matters. Continuity does not erase hardship. It only refuses extinction in that exact layer. The source explains that improved climate models also complicated the earliest Toba winter scenarios. Some earlier models imagined severe global cooling lasting many years, perhaps a decade or more, enough to devastate ecosystems across much of the planet. Later models, using different assumptions about aerosol spread, rainfall, and atmospheric behavior, have suggested that the cooling may have been more regional, more uneven. or shorter-lived than the strongest early versions proposed. Again, this does not make Toba small. Toba was immense. But immense is not the same as singular explanation. Africa may have suffered stress, especially in already vulnerable environments, but not necessarily a total continent-wide apocalypse. Some refuges may have endured. Some groups may have been buffered by coastal food, varied landscapes, or social networks. Some inland groups may have disappeared, while others survived. The pattern may have been patchy, and patchy disasters leave patchy evidence. This is where the story becomes less cinematic and more scientifically honest. One volcano is easier to imagine. A long, uneven pressure across habitats is harder. But the harder story may be closer to the truth. Alternative explanations gather around the bottleneck like shadows around a fire. Disease is one. A severe epidemic in small human populations could kill many and leave little trace in stone tools. A virus does not always leave a clear archaeological layer. It does not place a gray band in the soil for future researchers to brush clean. It moves through bodies, takes people, and leaves their tools behind. Disease is quiet in the record. A camp may remain. A hearth may remain. Stone flakes may remain. But the hands are gone. Imagine two bands meeting near a water source during a dry season. They need the same spring. They need mates, information, perhaps trade. They also carry microbes. A cough from one group becomes fever in another. Children weaken. Elders die with knowledge still inside them. The group does not understand transmission in our terms. They may think of spirits, bad air, cursed water, or angered ancestors. But the effect is biological and brutal. In small populations, disease does not need to kill everyone to change the future. It needs to remove enough lineages. Intergroup competition is another possibility. During long climate stress, groups may crowd into the same refuges, coasts, rivers, springs, valleys where food remains. More groups in fewer safe places means more tension. Cooperation can save lives, but competition can destroy them. A band driven from a water source may not survive. A conflict that would be local in a large population can become species shaping in a tiny one. Then there is prolonged climate decline. This may be the least dramatic and the most frightening. No single day when the sky breaks. No one eruption to blame. Just thousands of years of unstable weather, dry cycles, colder phases, shifting vegetation, shrinking habitats, and repeating local failures. Populations decline. Recover a little. Decline again. Groups separate. Some vanish. Some persist. Genetic diversity erodes not in one blow, but like shoreline under many tides. A slow hand at the throat. That is not as cinematic as Toba, but it may be how deep time often works. The source also raises population structure. Perhaps humans were divided into small, separated groups across Africa and beyond. If they rarely mixed, genetic models may read the pattern as a bottleneck, even if total numbers were larger. A meta-population, many small bands with limited exchange, can preserve low diversity in ways that resemble a crash. When later expansion comes from only some of those groups, the surviving genetic picture narrows further. This is complicated. But complication is not the enemy of story. It is the texture of truth. A simple tale says, volcano erupts. Humanity nearly dies. Survivors recover. A better tale says, volcano erupts into an already fragile world. Climate shifts. Disease moves. Groups compete. Refuges matter. Some archaeological lines continue. Some genetic lines vanish. And the final pattern inside us records not one clean strike, but a long passage through danger. The source is careful enough to allow that. Toba remains central because it is vast and well dated. It may have worsened a bottleneck. It may have created regional disasters. It may have pushed vulnerable groups past the edge. But the evidence from Jwalapuram and Pinnacle Point prevents us from treating it as the only answer. The ash layer is not a period at the end of the human sentence. In some places, it is a comma. That image is worth keeping. A gray comma in the soil. Not the end. A pause. A pressure. A mark that something terrible happened. But life continued on both sides. Now return to the scientists. One studies ash in India. Another studies shellfish remains in South Africa. Another runs climate models late at night, watching simulated aerosols drift through the stratosphere. Another reads genomes, looking for signals of ancient population size. Another argues that the bottleneck may be older. Another says the models are too simple. Another says the archaeology is too patchy. Another says the genetic evidence is real, but the cause is still unsettled. This is not failure. This is science doing what good science does. It refuses to let a dramatic story become unquestioned just because it is dramatic. It keeps the mystery alive until evidence deserves rest. For a sleep story that may sound almost inconvenient, a neat catastrophe would be easier. But uncertainty can be soothing in its own way, if we hold it correctly. It reminds us that deep history is not a movie. It is a shoreline at night. We see some shapes clearly when the moon touches them, and others remain dark. The bottleneck itself is the steady shape. Low genetic diversity. Small ancestral populations. Lost lineages. A narrow passage. The cause, or causes, remain debated. Now, let the debate move back into the body of human life. Whether the sky darkened from Toba, whether disease spread through stressed bands, whether climate dried landscapes over thousands of years, whether small groups became isolated, the people who survived had to do the same basic things. Find food. Keep fire. Protect children. Remember water. Share enough. Move when staying became dangerous. Stay when moving became worse. This is where the story becomes intimate again. The ancient crisis was not experienced as models, ash volumes, mutation rates, or published debates. It was experienced as ordinary difficulty repeated until it became history. A mother listening to a hungry child. A young man returning with nothing after a long hunt. an elder pointing toward a coastline where shellfish might still be gathered. A group arguing quietly over whether to approach another group at the spring. No one knew they were preserving human genetic diversity. They knew only the taste of smoke, the weight of a tool, the cold of a cave floor, the sound of the tide. In a small coastal refuge, survival may have depended less on the strongest hunter and more on the patient memory of gatherers. Which tubers can be eaten after soaking? Which ones poison if prepared wrongly? Where shellfish cling at low tide? Which season brings certain grubs under bark? Which spring lasts longest after dry months? Which path can be walked with children? Which strangers share signs? And which must be avoided? A bottleneck is not survived by bravery alone. It is survived by memory, routine, sharing, and flexible thought. The source wants us to feel that. It moves from genetic evidence and volcanic theory into lived reconstruction, because numbers alone cannot carry the grief. 2,000 breeding individuals is a statistic until it becomes a fire circle. A fire circle becomes history when we realize that every modern face leans out of its smoke. Picture the cave now. Southern African coast. Cold evening. The sea below is dark, but the tide is retreating. Inside, 25 people settle near embers. Not a nation. Not a tribe in the later political sense. A small band, perhaps 3 extended families, tied by kinship, need, memory, and the practical fact that no one survives alone for long. A child sleeps with salt still drying on the skin. An old woman turns a root in the ash, knowing how long it must cook. A young person listens, because listening may become survival later. Outside, the cause of the bottleneck remains unresolved in the language of science. Inside, the method of survival is already clear. They must make tomorrow. They must make tomorrow. That is the whole law of the cave. Not glory, not conquest, not a flag raised over stone. Only tomorrow, and after tomorrow, another morning, if the fire agrees, if the tide is kind, if the children wake, if the old people remember the path, if hunger does not turn the group against itself before the moon comes back. The cave sits above the southern coast of Africa, where the land meets the sea in cliffs, beaches, rock pools, and cold wind. The exact cave in our telling is imagined, but it is shaped from places like Pinnacle Point and other coastal refuges, where archaeology shows that people lived through harsh climate periods by using marine foods, tools, fire, pigment, and patient knowledge. Inside, the air is never fully clean. Smoke clings to the roof. Ash lies in soft gray beds near the hearth. The floor is hard and cold where skins do not cover it. Shell fragments gather near one wall, sharp under the feet if someone moves too quickly in the dark. The smell is salt, smoke, wet stone, old hides, roasted shellfish, human breath, and the faint sour edge of hunger. There are about 25 people in the group tonight. Not exactly 25 every season. A child may be born. An elder may die. A young adult may leave to join another group or bring someone back. A cousin group may arrive after a dry month, stay for a few days, share news, then move inland again. But tonight, count them softly. A few sleeping children, thin arms under skins. Several women and men with hands rough from stone. Zalt, Rut, and fire. 2 old people, perhaps 3, though age is different here. A person who reaches deep adulthood carries knowledge as precious as meat. A teenager watching everything, pretending not to be afraid. A baby whose breath is so small that someone checks it again and again. Survival begins with fire. The embers are never taken for granted. Fire is not a switch. Fire is a relationship. It must be fed, guarded, carried, hidden from rain, rescued from ash, and coaxed back into flame when morning cold stiffens the hands. Someone sleeps near it. Someone wakes to check it. A child is taught not to scatter it. A traveler from another band may be welcomed first by receiving warmth near it. Atdan. An elder kneels at the hearth. The cave is gray before sunrise. Outside, the sea mutters below the cliff. Inside, people are still bundled close. The elder moves slowly because old knees do not enjoy stone floors, and stone floors have never apologized for that. She lifts a thin crust of ash with a stick. Under it, one coal glows red, small and stubborn. She bends close. Her breath is careful. Too hard, and ash flies. Too soft, and nothing wakes. She feeds the coal with dry grass. Then a splinter of wood. Then a twist of bark saved from yesterday. Smoke curls. A thread of flame appears. The group has won the first task of the day. Fire means warmth, but also food, safety, light, tool making, stories, and the difference between raw survival and human survival. Fuel is gathered carefully. In some landscapes, wood is scarce. People may burn dried dung, bone, driftwood, or brush. Nothing that burns is merely trash. A small stick is stored time. A dry bone is heat waiting to happen. The day begins around that heat. The group does not simply wander for food. It follows memory. The older women know plants in a way that is not casual. They know tubers hidden under cracked soil. They know which roots must be roasted, which must be soaked, which must never be eaten, which look useful and are actually little underground betrayals. They know where grubs hide under bark. They know which bird calls mean nests nearby. They know where bees may have made honey in the warm season. They know the old spring that lasts longer than the shallow pools after dry months. This knowledge is not decorative. It is calories. Hunting is dramatic in stories. And yes, hunting matters. A successful kill can feed many. Meat can lift spirits. Fat can become strength. But hunting is uncertain. Animals move. Weapons fail. A hunter may return with only scratches, dust, and an expression that suggests nobody should ask too many questions before supper. Gathering is quieter, but often steadier. Hands die. Fingers test soil. A digging stick presses into earth. A root comes up with dirt clinging to it. Someone smells it, cuts it. They see this. Children learn by watching. They are corrected quickly, because the wrong plant does not care that a child is still learning. At low tide, the group moves toward the rocks. The path down is slow. Wind pushes hair across faces. Bare feet or wrapped feet find safe holds. The tide pools gleam under the morning light, holding little worlds in stone basins. Mussels cling in dark clusters. Limpets grip the rock with stubbornness that could teach philosophers a few things. Snails hide in crevices. Small fish flicker in trapped water. Seaweed moves like dark cloth. Hands pry, twist, gather. The work is cold. Fingers ache. Shell edges cut skin. A wave can surprise the unwary and soak a hide wrap that took hours to dry. But the ocean returns. That is its gift. It may be dangerous, but it is rhythmic. The animals of the tide zone replenish if not overused. A group that understands tide, moon, season, and restraint can draw life from the shore again and again. This is why coastal refuges matter in the Bottleneck story. When inland foods fail, the sea may still offer something. Not always enough, not always safely, but enough to make one more day possible. Shell middens, great accumulations of discarded shells. Tell archaeologists that humans return to these foods repeatedly. A midden is not pretty. Exactly. It is a pile of meals. But in deep history, a pile of meals is almost a love letter. Back at the cave, shells are roasted. They open with small clicks and sighs in the heat. Steam carries salt into the smoke. A child watches closely, hungry but trained to wait. Someone divides the food. Division is never easy when there is too little, and there is often too little. Food sharing is one of the central technologies of survival. It is as important as a blade. A group that cannot share may not last. But sharing is not sweetness all the time. Sharing creates arguments. Who worked? Who is sick? Who is nursing? Who found the food? Who failed to return with anything? Who has a child? Who is favored? Who is resented? The rules are not written, but everyone knows when they bend. One person takes a shellfish too quickly. Another notices. The cave goes quiet. No one shouts at first. Shouting wastes strength and may harden pride. An older man makes a dry comment, the kind that has a little humor and a little warning in it. Someone laughs, softly, not because it is funny enough to deserve laughter, but because laughter can keep a crack from widening. The food is adjusted. The silence loosens. The group survives the moment. This is not a small thing. Seasonal movement keeps the land from being stripped bare. The group may stay in the coastal cave when shellfish are abundant, then move towards springs, river valleys, or inland patches when certain plants come into season. They carry tools, skins, embers, if possible, children, stories, and arguments. The route is known through landmarks: a bent tree, a red stone face, a place where the wind smells different, a dry stream bed that leads to water after rare rain. Movement is dangerous, but staying too long is dangerous too. The group must decide before hunger decides for them. Elders are vital here. They remember the bad year when the near spring failed. They remember the path around the ravine. They remember a place where tortoises can be found after rain. They remember which neighboring band exchanged mates without violence, and which one left a scar on the shoulder of a man now sitting by the fire. Memory is a map with a heartbeat. Children are both burden and future. They need food. They slow movement. They cry at the worst possible moment, because children have never been known for reading survival conditions politely. Yet without them, there is no lineage. In a bottleneck, every surviving child is not an abstract future human. It is a whole branch of possible descendant. A mother chews food softer before giving it to a toddler. A father or uncle carries a child over sharp stones. An older sister watches a baby while adults search the tide pools. An elder tells a story that hides instructions inside animals and storms. Because children remember stories better than lectures. Honestly, many adults do too. At night, the group returns to the cave or another shelter. This matters. When survival is hard, meaning does not disappear. It becomes more necessary. The source points toward this kind of symbolic life as part of the ancient transformation. Around the long window of crisis and recovery, sites in southern Africa preserve ochre use, shell beads, refined tools, and evidence of planning. We should not claim one neat moment when the modern mind suddenly appears. Human cognition emerged over long stretches, with earlier roots and uneven preservation. But under pressure, certain abilities may have become more important. Language, memory, planning, teaching, cooperation. So the night fire becomes a school. An elder speaks. The story is not entertainment only. It is compressed survival. In the darkness beyond the cave, the ancient crisis continues, whether from climate, disease, ash, competition, or all of them. Inside, the group has made one more day. Shells lie cracked near the fire. Roots roast in ash. A child breathes steadily. The elder voice continues until the words soften and become almost part of the smoke. The future does not yet look like cities. It looks like a cave with enough food for tonight. It looks like a coal buried under ash. It looks like a small group that has not broken apart. And in that fragile circle, the species learns the habits that may carry it through the narrowest passage. Not strength alone, but memory shared, food divided, symbols marked, children taught, and fire kept alive until morning. The fire kept alive until morning is more than warmth. It is also a place where the mind changes. This is the strange possibility the source opens next. The ancient crisis may not have only threatened humanity. It may have helped shape what humanity became, not in a neat, heroic way, not as if disaster were some kind teacher with clean hands. Disaster is not kind. Hunger is not noble. Children do not become symbols while they are crying. But pressure can change what survives. And in the long narrowing of human numbers, certain traits may have mattered more than ever. A mind that could remember many places mattered. A voice that could teach clearly mattered. A hand that could shape a better point mattered. A group that could share symbols, warnings, and trust mattered. A person who could imagine a season not yet arrived, a coastline not yet reached, a stranger group not yet met, might carry others through danger. This is where the bottleneck becomes more than a story of loss. It becomes a story of selection, not only in bodies, but in behavior. The old world punished rigidity. It favored flexibility. It favored the ones who could look at a failing valley and think of a coast. It favored those who could turn red stone into a mark, shell into identity, heat into tool improvement, speech into memory that moved from one mind to another. The cave we enter now is Blombos. Blombos Cave lies on the southern coast of Africa, and it has become one of the great places for thinking about early modern human behavior. It does not give us a single clean birth certificate for the modern mind. No cave can do that. But it preserves signs that humans in this region were doing something deeply important, shaping objects not only for immediate survival, but for meaning, planning, identity, and communication. The cave opens toward the sea. Imagine it at dusk. The cliff face cools after sun. The ocean below moves in heavy, dark bands. Wind carries salt into the opening. Inside, smoke clings near the roof. A person sits with a piece of ochre in the hand, red, brown, earthy, soft enough to scrape, hard enough to hold a line. The person turns it. Not quickly. Not as a bored gesture. The fingers know the object. The surface is examined. A stone point or sharp flake is drawn across it. A line appears. Then another. Cross-hatched. Deliberate. Patterned. That matters. A random scrape is one thing. A pattern is another. A pattern, says the hand, is not only cutting, it is arranging. It is making a mark that refers to something, perhaps group, memory, ritual, count, identity, beauty, ownership, or a thought we cannot recover. We do not know exactly what the pattern meant. We should not pretend to. But the act itself says that meaning has entered the object. Ochre appears at many early human sites. It can color skin. It can treat hides. It can be used in adhesives. It can mark objects. It can become social signal. A red streak on the body may say, I belong here. This is my group. This is my role. This is mourning. This is celebration. This is warning. Or perhaps all of those at different times. The source treats ochre as a sign of symbolic thought. That is reasonable, with caution. Ochre can have practical uses, but repeated selection, grinding, engraving, and transport suggest that humans cared about more than raw utility. Increases. Carrying a red stone that does not fill the stomach means the mind has made room for something beyond hunger. That may sound small, it is not. A species at the edge, still making symbols, is a species refusing to live only in the immediate moment. Then come shell beads. Small shells, pierced carefully, perhaps strung together on fiber. A necklace, a bracelet, a sewn ornament, a marker of identity. Each bead requires time, selection, perforation, stringing, wearing, repair. A shell bead is not a spear point. It does not kill an animal. It does not dig a root. It does not boil water. It says something socially, and in a survival world, social meaning can be as practical as a blade. A bead can tell a stranger, I am of this group. It can tell an ally, I remember the bond. It can tell a mate, I carry skill, patience, and belonging. It can tell a child, you are one of us. This is the beginning of networks that can stretch beyond the campfire. The source connects such symbolic objects to the broader emergence of behavioral modernity, a phrase that refers to the suite of behaviors we associate with modern humans. Symbolic marking, complex tools, long-distance exchange, planning, art, ritual, structured language, innovation, flexible adaptation. Scholars debate timing. Some of these behaviors appear earlier than once thought. Some appear unevenly. Some vanish and return depending on preservation and population. It is not a single explosion in one place on one dramatic morning. The modern mind was not a torch lit all at once. It was more like embers in several shelters, some nearly going out, some catching again when the wind changed. Still, Blombos gives us a strong glow. Bone tools appear there. Carefully shaped points, shell beads, engraved ochre, evidence of heat-treated stone technology. Heat treatment is especially interesting because it requires planning. You do not simply grab a rock, heat it until it looks exciting, and hit it while making optimistic noises. The stone must be heated under controlled conditions, then allowed to cool, changing its fracture properties so it can be shaped more finely. It requires understanding delayed results. The work done now produces better toolmaking later. That is future thinking. A person must imagine a tool that does not yet exist. Must know that the fire today changes the stone for tomorrow. Must resist the urge to rush. Honestly, that is impressive in any century. Many modern people cannot wait for bread to cool without injuring themselves. These ancient makers were controlling heat and stone in ways that show patience, memory, and teaching. Teaching is the key. A complex technique does not spread well if every person must rediscover it alone. Someone must show someone else. Words help. Gestures help. Correction helps. Repetition helps. A child watches an adult strike stone. The adult stops the hand, moves the wrist, points to the angle, says a sound that means not there. Here. The child tries again. The flake breaks wrong. The adult sighs. Education continues, as it always has, with patience being tested by young hands. Language becomes central. We cannot recover the exact language of the Bottleneck survivors. Their words are gone. No sound was pressed into clay. No recording waited in a cave. But the behaviors preserved in archaeology suggest that communication was increasingly complex. Teaching tool-making, coordinating group movement, sharing information about distant resources, arranging exchanges, identifying kin and strangers, maintaining rituals, and telling survival stories all require more than simple calls. Language may have been the thread that held scattered groups together. A word can carry a place. A story can carry a season. A warning can carry danger beyond one lifetime. A name can hold someone who has died. Under crisis conditions, groups with better communication could coordinate more efficiently. They could plan routes. They could remember tide cycles. They could negotiate with neighbors. They could transmit plant knowledge. They could keep social rules stable enough to avoid splitting apart over every hunger dispute. Then comes the feedback loop. Better language allows better teaching. Better teaching preserves more knowledge. More knowledge creates more complex tasks. More complex tasks require better language. Round and round it goes, like a shell spiral, tightening into mind. The source suggests that survival pressure may have selected for creativity and cooperation. Not because only gentle people survived. Human history is never that tidy. But groups that balanced competition with sharing, innovation with tradition, and personal desire with group need may have lasted better than groups that broke under stress. In a small population, social failure is biological failure. If a group splits too often, mates become scarce. If knowledge is hoarded badly, children die ignorant. If leaders are rigid, root fail. If no one trusts anyone, food sharing collapses. The bottleneck may have favored minds that could model other minds. Who is angry? Who is hungry? Who can be trusted? Who needs comfort? Who is lying about the last piece of shellfish? And whether making a scene is worth the trouble. Social intelligence becomes survival intelligence. Symbolic identity also helps. A bead pattern, an ochemak, a style of tool, a song, a gesture. These can identify allies across distance. If two bands meet near water and recognize a shared signal, the encounter may begin with less fear. Exchange becomes possible. Marriage partners can move between groups. New ideas travel. Genetic diversity may recover. Cultural diversity thickens. A shell bead can become a bridge. That sounds poetic, but it may also be practical. Standardized tools across distances suggest that information traveled between groups. Similar techniques do not spread by magic. People move. People meet. People copy. People teach. A style becomes shared because some form of social connection carries it. The crisis mind is not only smarter in the narrow sense, it is more networked. That may be one of our defining traits. A human alone is vulnerable. Humans connected by memory, language, symbols, and exchange become something else. The source frames this as the forge of modern cognition. Again, we hold caution. Some behaviors appear before the bottleneck. Some may not be caused by it directly. Evolution is rarely a single event. But it is plausible that severe pressure made certain capacities more valuable and accelerated their spread among surviving groups. Now return to the cave at night. A person carves lines into ochre by firelight. Another pierces a shell with care. A child repeats a word for a place beyond the ridge. An elder corrects the order of a story because the story contains the route to water. A young maker places stone near heat, not for now, but for later. None of them says abstract thought. None of them says behavioral modernity. They say this mark, this shell, this path, this fire, this child, but the future is forming in those small acts. The mind has learned to hold what is absent, a place not seen, a person not present, a season not yet arrived, a rule not written, a group identity carried by a bead, a tool hidden inside a stone before the stone has been shaped. That is abstraction. That is one of the great human powers. It may have helped our ancestors pass through the narrow throat of history. The emotional truth is gentle, but enormous. The crisis did not make humans great by being cruel. It nearly ended them. But the survivors who came through were those who could remember, imagine, teach, cooperate, innovate, and repair social bonds in the dark. The traits we now consider most human may have been sharpened because the world became unforgiving. The fire in our room burns low. In the cave, the ochre mark remains on stone. A bead is strung. A child sleeps. The tide turns below. The group is still small, still vulnerable, still one illness or famine away from grief. But something has changed. They are no longer only enduring the world. They are representing it, planning through it, and carrying it in symbols from one mind to another. That is how a species begins to move from survival to story. And once story becomes strong enough, memory can travel beyond one body, beyond one camp, beyond one coast. The bottleneck narrows the human line. The mind begins to widen it again. The mind begins to widen the narrow line again. After long pressure, after ash, drought, cold seasons, disease, empty camps, and coastlines that kept small groups alive by inches, the world does what worlds do. It changes again. Not suddenly, not kindly. There is no morning when the sky opens and says the danger has passed. Recovery comes in fragments. A little more rain one season. A stream that lasts longer. A herd passing closer to the old route. More shellfish at a familiar coast. A child who survives a fever. Two groups meeting without fighting. Another birth. Another fire. The silence lifts by degrees. In Africa, climates shifted. The exact timing and pattern remain complex because deep time does not lay its evidence in straight lines. But between roughly 60,000 and 50,000 years ago, genetic and archaeological evidence suggests that some human populations began to expand. The old narrowness did not vanish all at once. Yet the human line started to thicken. Groups moved more widely. Networks reached farther. Toolkits changed. More children lived long enough to become parents. Imagine the first signs of recovery as sound. Insects returning to grass. Birds at dawn. Hooves in the distance. Water over stone. Human voices farther apart than before. Not because people are dying, but because the camp has grown large enough to spread out while working. A child laughs near the cave entrance. An elder hears it and does not smile exactly, because elders have work to do and dignity to defend. But the eyes soften. The world is still dangerous. Recovery is not paradise. It is only a wider margin between hunger and death. The group still plans carefully. Fires must still be kept. Children still get sick. Food still fails. But there is enough room now for more movement, more meeting, more experiment. The species that nearly vanished begins to stretch. People follow rivers. A river is a path that drinks. It gives water, animals, plants, fish, reeds, clay, and direction. It carves corridors through dry land. A group can move along it. Pause, gather, cross, return. Valleys become memory lines. Grasslands open. Coasts continue to offer steady foods when tides are understood. The old refuges remain important, but they are no longer the whole world. Toolkits grow more varied. Microliths appear in some traditions. Small, carefully shaped stone pieces that can be mounted into wood or bone. Composite tools matter because they show planning beyond one object. A point, a shaft, binding fiber, adhesive, heat, pressure, repair, all must work together. A spear is not merely sharpened wood now. It is a system in the hand. Leaf-shaped points are made. Scrapers are refined. Blades become more specialized. Bone tools show patience and control. Heat-treated stone continues to reveal the quiet genius of waiting. The maker knows that a rock near fire today becomes a better edge tomorrow. There is something almost tender in that, a trust in later usefulness. A person sits by a low fire, turning a stone core in the hand. The flame is not for cooking only. It is workshop light. The maker strikes. A flake comes free. It catches firelight along its edge. Not a miracle. Better than a miracle. A method. Exchange networks thicken. A shell found far inland means someone carried it, traded it, gifted it, wore it, or valued it enough to move it beyond its coast. Stone from one region appears in another. Beads, pigmen, tools, stories, marriage partners, and survival knowledge travel between groups. A band alone can survive for a while. Bands connected can adapt. Picture two groups meeting near water. They approach slowly. Not every meeting is safe. Strangers mean danger as much as possibility. But one person wears shells strung in a familiar way. Another carries a point shaped like those used by a neighboring lineage. Someone recognizes a gesture. Someone speaks a related sound. The first fear lowers just enough for exchange to begin. A bead passes from one hand to another. It may seem small. It is not small. It says, "We have met before," or "We may meet again." It says, "There is a path between us." It says, "Perhaps my elder knows the dry season route. Perhaps your people have seen animals moving east. Perhaps we do not need to fight today. In a world recovering from near extinction, connection is fertility. Connection is medicine. Connection is memory with legs." The source emphasizes coastal movement. Coasts are not easy highways, but they are rich lines of possibility. Shellfish, fish, seabirds, seals, stranded animals, seaweed, estuaries, mangroves, tidal pools, fresh water near river mouths, all create a chain of resources. A group that understands the coast can move from one edible edge to another. Dam. A band leaves an old refuge. They do not carry much by modern standards, but everything matters. Stone tools wrapped in hide, shell beads, fire carried as embers if possible, ocha, bone points, scrapers, children, memories. Grief, a story of the last place where water held through the dry season. A warning about a ridge where another group attacked. A song that keeps walking pace. A practical joke someone has told too many times. And yet the group still lets him tell it, because the walking is long. The shoreline opens ahead. The sea is gray. The wind tastes of salt. Feet press into damp sand. Behind them, the old cave grows smaller. In front of them, the coast bends out of sight. The journey does not look heroic while it happens. It looks like tired people carrying children and hoping the next place has food. This is how expansions begin. Not with maps. With hunger and memory. The great movement out of Africa was not one march by one people on one neat road. It was likely many movements. Some failed, some successful, some leaving no descendants, some leaving traces in stone and genes. The source names 3 broad doors: the Nile Corridor, the Sinai, and Bab el-Mandeb, the narrow crossing near the southern Red Sea. Each door has its own mood. The Nile Corridor offers water through desert, a green line northward. The Sinai opens toward Western Asia, harsh and passable in certain climates. Bab el-Mandeb is a narrow water threshold, where Africa looks toward Arabia across a difficult but imaginable distance, especially when sea levels were lower. Imagine dawn at Bab el-Mandeb. People stand near the shore. The water is not a wide ocean, but it is enough to frighten. Across it lies another land. The air smells of salt and dry stone. Birds move over the channel. Someone watches currents. Someone checks bundles. Someone looks back toward Africa, not as a continent in the modern sense, but as the known world, the home of ancestors, the place of graves and paths and old fires. Then they cross. We do not know the exact faces, the exact words, the exact fear, but some humans crossed into new lands and kept moving. Along southern Arabia, into South Asia, along coasts and rivers, through India, Southeast Asia, eventually towards Sahul, the ancient combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea. By around 65,000 years ago, or perhaps somewhat later, depending on the evidence and interpretation, humans reached Australia, which implies remarkable movement and water-crossing ability. Each new coastline was both familiar and strange. The tide still moved. Shellfish still clung. Fish still flashed in shallows. But the plants differed. The animals differed. Human beings carried old skills into new places, then changed the skills to fit the place. Along the way, they met others. Neanderthals in Western Eurasia. Denisovans somewhere across parts of Asia. Perhaps other archaic human groups whose bones and genes are only partly known. These were not monsters. They were human cousins, different lineages, adapted to their own worlds, with tools, bodies, knowledge, and histories. A first encounter must have been extraordinary. Imagine a ridge at evening. One group sees movement across the valley. The figures are human, but not quite like the people watching. Familiar enough to disturb. Unfamiliar enough to make every hand move closer to a weapon. For a long moment, no one speaks. Fear comes first. Curiosity follows. Sometimes avoidance. Sometimes conflict. Sometimes exchange. Sometimes mating. The genetic record tells us that modern humans interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. Many people outside Africa today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal ancestry. Some populations, especially in parts of Oceania and Asia, carry Denisovan ancestry as well. These inheritances are not story decoration. They remain in immune function, adaptation, disease risk, and traits such as high-altitude adaptation in Tibetans linked to Denisovan ancestry. The Bottleneck survivors did not simply replace the world. They joined it. Sometimes, they absorbed pieces of other human histories, and those pieces still live in modern bodies. That fact adds a strange tenderness to the expansion. The human family is not a clean tree with one trunk marching alone. It is a braid. Some strands are thin, some broken, some still visible in DNA, even when the people who carried them vanished as separate populations. A Neanderthal child once slept by a fire. A Denisovan woman once looked at a mountain or a forest or a cave wall. Their descendants, in fragments, are still here. As modern humans spread, the old bottleneck did not disappear. It traveled inside them. Low diversity, shared ancestry, traces of ancient scarcity, all moved along coastlines and river corridors. The flame expanded, but it was still the same flame that nearly went out. Groups grew. Networks widened. Camps became more frequent. Tool styles diversified. Songs changed. Bodies adapted. Stories moved farther than the people who first told them. What had once been a few thousand vulnerable ancestors became many bands across many landscapes. Still fragile, still mortal, but no longer balanced on one narrow edge. Recovery then expansion, then encounter. That is the arc. Not triumph in the loud sense, more like breath returning after a long illness. The species did not rise because danger vanished. It rose because the survivors carried enough skill, language, symbolic thought, social connection, and flexible intelligence to make use of every opening the world gave them. The rain returned in some places. The people moved. The coast became a road. The river became a guide. The bead became a passport. The tool became a memory of method. The story became a map. And the small ancestral fire, guarded through ash, hunger, and cold, began to multiply across the dark surface of the earth. In the firelit room, that image is almost too large. The world did not become safe, but it became inhabited by a species that had learned the terrible art of continuing. Now the migrating bands move beyond the edge of our sight, into coastlines, valleys, deserts, forests, ice margins, and islands. They carry the ancient scar without knowing it. Their bodies remember what their minds do not. Their descendants will one day build cities, hospitals, observatories, temples, farms, ships, satellite, and languages enough to name the stars. But inside every descendant, the bottleneck remains. The story now comes back to you, not as distant prehistory, but as biology. The narrow passage is not only behind us in the past. It is folded into the cells of every person listening now, a quiet museum of survival, built from the legions of those who crossed the throat of human history and kept the fire alive. The narrow passage is folded into you, not as a story you can remember in the ordinary way, not as a picture of a cave or a coastline or a child sleeping beside embers. It is deeper than memory. It is in the quiet museum inside every cell, in the long script of DNA that your body copies while you sleep, while you walk, while you breathe without thinking. Every cell carries an archive. Not a perfect archive. Not a clean book with clear chapter titles. More like a room of old fragments, some bright, some broken, some repeated, some faded by chance. There are marks of ancient hunger there, marks of small populations, marks of lineages that made it through because their carriers survived long enough to have children, and because those children survived too. The bottleneck is not only behind us, it is present. When scientists say humans have low genetic diversity, they are describing that ancient narrowing still visible in the living world. Billions of people, countless faces, languages, histories, and ways of being. Yet, under the surface, we are closer kin than our surface differences suggest. The old comparison returns. Two chimpanzees from different parts of Africa can be more genetically different from each other than two humans chosen from the far ends of the earth. That should make the room quiet. Not because human differences do not matter. They do. Culturally, historically, personally. But biologically, we are a young crowd grown from a small surviving base. We are cousins through a door that nearly closed. A founder effect works like this. A small group survives or moves into a new place. The traits carried by that group become the starting set for everyone who descends from them. Some traits are useful. Some are neutral. Some are harmful. Some are simply there because chance chose the carriers. Over time, the descendants multiply, and the accident becomes common. At the species scale, the bottleneck acted like a founder effect for the human future. It chose without intention. It preserved some variation. It lost much more. Imagine again the colored stones. Not in a laboratory now, but in a dark hand beside an ancient fire. The storm has taken most of the bag. The handful remains. Later, those stones are copied again and again until the whole world is full of them. New colors appear slowly through mutation. New combinations form through generations. But the missing stones are still missing. This is why the bottleneck is double-edged. It gave us unity. It also gave us vulnerability. Low diversity can make a species more fragile in some ways. If everyone is genetically similar, a disease that can exploit one body pattern may travel more easily through many bodies. Some harmful mutations can become more common if they passed through again. Founder effects in later human populations can make certain genetic disorders more frequent in particular groups. Chance becomes ancestry. This does not mean every modern illness comes from the bottleneck. That would be far too simple. Human disease is shaped by many forces: environment, diet, infection, migration, culture, age, medicina, and pure chance. But the ancient narrowing belongs to the background of human biology. It is one reason our species is not as genetically broad as its population size might suggest. The source connects this to medicine. Modern medicine depends partly on our shared biology. Because humans are so closely related, many treatments can work across populations. Vaccines can protect widely. Research in one group can often help another, though medicine must still respect real variation and avoid careless assumptions. Our similarity is useful. It makes global medicine possible in ways that would be harder in a species with much deeper internal divisions. So the scar is not only weakness, it is also connection. A pathogen sees similarity and takes advantage. A doctor sees similarity and can treat. The same inheritance carries risk and rescue. This is the pattern again and again. Humanity is fragile and resilient in the same breath. Some traits that once helped survival can hurt in a different world. A body that stores energy well may have helped an ancestor survive hunger. But in a modern environment of constant calories, that same tendency may become metabolic trouble. Stress responses that helped a small band notice danger may become anxiety in a city where threats are abstract and endless. A quick inflammatory response may have helped fight infection, yet become harmful when triggered too often. We should be careful with such links. Modern health is complex, and not every modern condition is a direct echo of prehistory. Still, the broad idea is fair. Bodies are shaped by older worlds. We live with systems built for scarcity, danger, movement, social dependence, darkness, fire, hunger, and uncertain mornings. Then we place those bodies in bright rooms, long workdays, processed food, crowded cities, screens, clocks, and news that can frighten us from every continent at once. No wonder the old body sometimes looks around and says, "This cave is very strange." There is a little humor in that, but also truth. The bottleneck also gives us a philosophical inheritance. Every person alive is here because a chain did not break. Not once. Not across tens of thousands of years. Every ancestor in your line survived long enough to pass life forward. Through volcanic winters or not. Through diseases. Through hunger. Through childbirth. Through migrations. Through predators. Through war. Through ice. Through heat. Through loss. Through bad decisions made by other people near water sources, which may be one of the oldest human hazards. Your existence is a long sequence of narrow escapes, not chosen by destiny in any provable sense. Just astonishing. The source asks us to see modern humanity through that lens. 8 billion people are not evidence that survival was guaranteed. They are evidence that a very unlikely line continued. A species that nearly vanished now fills the planet, builds machines, studies its own genome, and worries about the future with a nervousness that may be one of its more useful traits. Because the old danger has not disappeared. It has changed scale. Our ancestors faced local and regional catastrophes, climate swings, eruptions, disease, competition, and failing resources. We face climate change, pandemics, nuclear weapons, engineered pathogens, runaway technologies, ecological collapse, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, and risks we may not yet know how to name. The difference is that our world is connected. That connection can save us. It can also spread harm. The lesson of the bottleneck is not that we should be afraid of everything. Fear alone is poor shelter. The lesson is that survival depends on cooperation, memory, communication, and flexibility. The small coastal groups did not survive by pretending the world was safe. They survived by reading signs, sharing food, keeping fire, moving when needed, teaching children, building networks, and making meaning strong enough to hold a group together under stress. Those are still our tools. The scale has changed. The need has not. Today, a scientist watching climate data is not so different from an elder watching clouds and grass. A doctor tracing an outbreak is not so different from a healer noticing which camps have begun to cough. A community sharing knowledge before a storm is part of the same human tradition as a coastal band warning relatives where the water remains. Satellite, laboratories, and global communication are new forms of old survival habits. The fire is larger now. It is a planetary fire. Cities at night from above look like scattered embers across continents. Roads glow. Ports shine. Homes flicker. Screens light faces in dark rooms. It is easy to see abundance and forget fragility. But the old bottleneck sits under the brightness like a shadow under a flame. We have been few before. We have been vulnerable before. We have needed one another before. That may be the deepest part of the inheritance. Shared ancestry is not sentimental decoration. It is biological fact. Every border, language, custom, and quarrel sits on top of a much older kinship. We are the descendants of survivors who could not afford perfect separation. They exchanged mates, tools, stories, warnings, food, and genes. They lived because connection widened the narrow path. Modern life often teaches separation. The genome remembers relation. The bottleneck can also change how we think of time. A life feels long from inside it. A century feels historic. 1,000 years feels ancient. But the bottleneck lies tens of thousands of years behind us, close enough to shape our DNA, far enough to feel like another world. Yet every generation between then and now had the same simple task. Keep going. Not forever. Just long enough. One mother nurses a child. One elder teaches a path. One maker shapes a blade. One group crosses a narrow waterway. One stranger becomes kin. One fire survives the rain. History is built from such small continuities. The source ends with this paradox. Humanity is fragile because it nearly vanished. Humanity is resilient because the ones who survived did so through adaptation. Both are true. We are not invincible. We are not doomed either. We are a species shaped by a crisis so deep that it left a mark in the genome, and by a response so powerful that it carried us across the world. Return now to the ancestral fire. The cave is dark. The sea below moves in slow breaths. A child sleeps with one hand open. An elder watches the last embers and judges whether to add another stick. Someone has hung shell beads near the sleeping place. Someone has carried ochre from far away. Someone has told a story that contains a route to water, a warning about strangers, and a memory of the dead. They do not know us. They cannot imagine our cities. They cannot imagine that one day people will look into cells and find traces of their narrow passage. They cannot imagine that their hunger will become a graph, their survival a model, their scar a lesson in a world lit by electricity. But they know enough. They know the fire must last until morning. They know the children must be taught. They know food must be shared, though not always easily. They know the coast, the route, the spring, the tool, the story. They know one more day matters. That knowledge was enough. And because it was enough, you are here. The fire beside us is low now. Ash folds softly over red coals. The room is still. Outside, the modern world continues with its lights and machines and restless questions. Inside, if you listen gently, you can almost hear the older fire under it all. A small group breathing in a cave. A tide turning below. A stone tool set near the hearth. A child dreaming without knowing that the future of a species is sleeping in the same room. The bottleneck was a wound. It was also a doorway. We came through it diminished in some ways, bound together in others, carrying lost colors and shared colors, carrying risk and resilience, carrying the memory of crisis in the quiet script of the body. Rest with that gently. Your breath belongs to a long line of breaths that did not stop. Your body is a living archive of narrow escapes. Your life is not separate from the ancient fire. It is one of its sparks, still moving forward through the dark. Good night,